The Lighthouse Keeper's Secret. A story for listening before sleep. Part 1, The Letter. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, postmarked from a place called Beacon Island. Inside was a single handwritten letter on cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of salt and old books. Dear Oliver, you don't know me, but I know you. I've known of you for quite some time. My name is Henry Whitmore, and I am, or was, the lighthouse keeper on Beacon Island, off the coast of Nova Scotia. I'm writing to you because I am dying, and before I do, there's something you need to know about your family. Something that has been kept secret for 40 years. Come to the lighthouse. Come alone. The rare answers here that only you can understand. The ferry leaves from Port Halliday every Tuesday and Friday. I'll be watching for you. Henry Whitmore. Oliver Crane read the letter 3 times, each time more confused than the last. He was 34 years old, an architect in Toronto, and he had no connection to lighthouses or small islands or anyone named Henry Whitmore. His family history was straightforward: parents from Ontario, grandparents from small towns across Canada, nothing mysterious or dramatic. And yet, something in the letter pulled at him. Something in the formal language and the certainty that there are answers here that only you can understand suggested that whoever had written this letter knew something about him, something real. Oliver worked at a mid-sized architecture firm, designing office buildings and shopping centers, functional, profitable, utterly forgettable work. He had a decent apartment, a reasonable salary, and a quiet life that satisfied no one, least of all himself. His mother had called just the week before. Oliver, you're not getting any younger. When are you going to settle down? When are you going to do something important? He had no answer for her. He had no answer for himself. But this letter, this mysterious letter from a dying stranger, seemed to offer something different. Amy's Terry. A reason to move. A possible answer to questions he hadn't even known he was asking. Oliver made a decision that surprised himself. He called his firm and took a leave of absence. He told his mother he was going on a research trip for a project. He booked a flight to Halifax and rented a car. By Thursday evening, he was standing at the dock in Port Halliday, watching a small ferry being prepared for departure. The ferry captain, a weathered man named Thomas, looked skeptical when Oliver asked for passage to Beacon Island. Not many people go out there, Thomas said. Just the keeper and the occasional researcher. You got business with Henry? Something like that, Oliver replied. Well, it's a rough ride this time of year, Thomas warned. But we've got good weather today. You picked a decent day to make the crossing. The journey took 40 minutes. The island appeared gradually through the mist, first as a vague shape, then more distinct. It was smaller than Oliver expected, mostly rocky outcrops and tough vegetation. And rising from the highest point was the lighthouse itself, a white tower with red trim, rotating light visible even in the pale afternoon sun. As the ferry approached the dock, Oliver saw a figure waiting. The man was tall, possibly in his 80s, with white hair and a face weathered by decades of wind and sun. He wore a heavy wool sweater despite the mild weather. Oliver, the man called out as the ferry pulled up to the dock. Yes, Oliver confirmed, stepping onto the weathered boards of the pier. I'm Henry, the old man said, extending a hand that was surprisingly strong. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, Oliver admitted. Your letter was unexpected. Come, Henry said. We have much to discuss, and I'm not sure how much time I have left. The doctor gave me 6 months, maybe less. But we should talk while I still have the strength to tell you everything. They walked along a path toward the lighthouse, passing through low vegetation and over rocky terrain. The island smelled of salt and seaweed and something else, something ancient, as if the rocks themselves held memories. How do you know about me? Oliver asked as they walked. Your mother, Henry said simply. We were close, a long time ago. Before she married your father. Before she had you. But that's a story that requires more context. Come. Let's go inside. I'll make tea, and then I'll tell you everything. Part 2, The Story of Two Souls. The lighthouse interior was nothing like Oliver expected. Instead of cold stone and metal, it was warm and filled with books. Every available surface held volumes, stacked on shelves, piled on tables, arranged in careful towers on the floor. The walls were covered with photographs, paintings, and handwritten notes. It was the home of someone who had spent decades in solitude, creating meaning through collection and contemplation. Henry prepared tea in a small kitchen and they settled into comfortable chairs by a large window overlooking the ocean. The light was beginning to turn golden as afternoon moved toward evening. "Your mother's name was Eleanor," Henry began. "Is Eleanor, I should say. She's still alive, as far as I know." "Is she?" "Yes," Oliver confirmed. "She's in her 70s. She lives in London, Ontario with my father." Henry nodded slowly, as if this information both pleased and saddened him. "I thought she might be. I've kept track, you see. I've always kept track." He paused, looking out at the ocean. "When Eleanor was 22 years old, she came to this island. It was 1983. She was running away from her family. They wanted her to marry a man she didn't love, to take over the family business, to live a small, predetermined life. She had other dreams. She wanted to be a writer. She wanted to travel. She wanted to know herself before committing to anyone or anything. She never told me any of this," Oliver said. "No," Henry agreed. "She probably never told anyone. But she came here, to this island, because she had read about me in a newspaper article. I was already the keeper, had been for 5 years, and I was known locally as something of an eccentric, a man who lived alone, who read philosophy and wrote poetry, who didn't fit into normal society. Eleanor thought that perhaps on this island, with this strange keeper, she could figure out who she was." Henry stood and walked to a shelf, pulling down a worn leather journal. "She stayed for 6 months. 6 months that changed both our lives. During the day, she would help me maintain the lighthouse, and in the evenings, we would talk. We talked about books, about art, about the meaning of life, about what it meant to be truly alive versus merely existing. We fell in love, Oliver. Quietly, deeply, completely." Oliver felt something shift in his chest. His mother, practical, conventional, always pushing him toward stability and security, had been in love with a lighthouse keeper. Had lived on an island for 6 months. "What happened?" Oliver asked, though somehow he already knew the answer. "Her family found her," Henry said quietly. "They were powerful people with resources. They came to the island and they took her away. They told her that if she didn't leave me, they would cut her off entirely, no money, no support, no connection to her family. She was 22 years old. She was afraid. I told her to go, to save herself, to live the life she was meant to live. I thought that was what love meant, letting someone go. But she didn't become a writer," Oliver observed. "She didn't travel." "No," Henry agreed sadly. "She married your father, who was respectable and stable and everything her family wanted. She had you. She built a conventional life. But I think, Oliver, she always wondered what might have been. I think she always wondered about this place, about me, about the version of herself that existed here on this island." They sat in silence for a long time. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, turning the sky into shades of orange and pink. "Why are you telling me this?" Oliver finally asked. "Why did you call me here?" Henry turned to face him directly. "Because you are her son, and you are making the same mistakes she made. You are living a life that doesn't belong to you. You are doing work that doesn't matter to you. You are compromising yourself for security and approval, just as she did. And I want to tell you, before I die, that it's not worth it. That the only life worth living is the one that's authentically yours." Oliver felt tears on his cheeks. "How do you know that about me? How could you possibly know that I am unhappy?" "Because Eleanor told me," Henry said gently. "When you were born, she sent me a photograph. And very few years after, she would send me updates. Not letters exactly, just brief notes, photographs, sometimes just a newspaper clipping about something you'd accomplished. She was tracking you, Oliver, the way I've tracked her. She was trying to understand, through you, what her other life might have been. And I could see, in the photographs, The same expression I remembered from her, that hunger, that searching, that sense that something important was missing. Did she know you existed? After she left? Oliver asked. I don't think so, Henry said. I think her family made sure of that. But I kept track of her. I read her name in newspapers when her business husband was mentioned. I saw photographs sometimes. He watched her grow older, watched you grow up, and I thought, perhaps this is my punishment for letting her go so easily. To spend the rest of my life watching from a distance the life I might have had. Part 3, The Island Reveals Its Secrets. That first night, Henry insisted that Oliver stay in the keeper's cottage, a small house adjacent to the lighthouse. The cottage was cozy, with a fireplace and a bed that smelled of fresh linens and lavender. Oliver lay awake for hours, his mind processing the extraordinary revelation. His mother, conventional, predictable Eleanor, had once been a dreamer. She had lived on this island. She had fallen in love with this man. In the morning, Henry took Oliver on a tour of the island. It was larger than it appeared from a distance, with hidden coves and sheltered areas where rare plants grew. Henry pointed out the places where he and Eleanor had walked, the rocks where they had sat and talked, the small cave where they had sheltered during a storm. She loved this place, Henry said as they stood on the highest point of the island, looking out at the vast expanse of ocean. She said that the lighthouse made sense to her, how it guided lost ships safely home, how it burned through the darkness, how it existed to serve a purpose larger than itself. That's beautiful, Oliver said. But also sad. If she loved it so much, why did she leave without fighting harder? Because she was young, Henry replied. Because she was afraid. Because the world was different then, and women had fewer choices. And because, I think, she believed that stability and security were more important than passion. That it was better to have a safe, predictable life than to risk everything for something uncertain. He paused. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I didn't have the courage. I let her go, and I spent the next 40 years alone, maintaining this lighthouse, waiting for ships that were increasingly guided by electronic systems instead of my light. They walked in silence for a while. Oliver found himself thinking about his own life, the architecture firm, the apartment in Toronto, the endless cycle of uninspired work. What happened to you? Oliver asked. After she left. Did you ever love anyone else? No, Henry said simply. I didn't. I devoted myself to this lighthouse, to books, to understanding the nature of loss and longing. I became a hermit, in a way. A voluntary hermit, but a hermit nonetheless. He smiled sadly. Not a recommended path, Oliver. I'm telling you this because I want you to learn from my mistakes as well as your mother's. Don't spend your life waiting for something that's already past. Don't sacrifice your authentic self in the hopes that stability will eventually bring happiness. As the day progressed, Henry showed Oliver his collection of journals, decades of writing, thousands of pages of philosophy, poetry, and personal reflection. He showed him the logbooks where he had recorded every ship that passed, every storm, every clear night when the stars were visible. He showed him photographs of Eleanor, some from their time together on the island, others clipped from newspapers over the years. I want you to have these, Henry said, gesturing to the journals and photographs. After I'm gone. I want you to understand, really understand, what it means to choose authenticity over convention, what it costs to live in solitude. What it means to spend a lifetime wondering about what might have been. Oliver held one of the journals. Henry's handwriting was elegant but shaky, the writing of a man trying to impose order on overwhelming emotion. He opened it randomly and read, 40 years I have tended this light, guiding ships safely home while my own home was emptied of the only person who made it feel like home. Is it noble, this sacrifice? Or is it cowardice dressed up as dedication? Oliver felt something break open inside him. Part 4, The Days on the Island. Oliver had planned to stay for just one night, but he found himself unable to leave. Henry's health seemed to be deteriorating. Some days he could barely leave his bed, other days he seemed to gather strength and energy, as if urgency was pushing him forward. Oliver called his firm and extended his leave. His boss seemed relieved. Take as much time as you need, his boss said. We'll manage. Days turned into weeks. Oliver and Henry developed a rhythm. In the mornings, Oliver would help Henry with basic tasks, preparing meals, maintaining the lighthouse mechanisms, tending to the small garden that somehow produced vegetables despite the harsh climate. In the afternoons, Henry would rest while Oliver read through the journals, absorbing decades of a man's internal landscape. What struck Oliver most was the consistency of Henry's emotional journey. The journals spanned 40 years, and yet the fundamental themes remained the same: loss, longing, the search for meaning, the struggle to accept the path that life had taken. But there was also beauty in Henry's writing, observations about nature, about light, about the human capacity for both suffering and joy. One afternoon, as they sat watching storm clouds gather over the ocean, Henry asked Oliver a direct question: "What would you do if you could do anything? If there were no expectations, no financial constraints, no one to disappoint but yourself?" Oliver considered the question seriously. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's the problem. I've spent so long doing what I thought I should do that I'm not sure what I actually want." "Then that's what you need to discover," Henry said. "Not here on this island necessarily, but in your life. You need to ask yourself the hard questions. Not the practical questions, those are easy. But the questions about identity, about authenticity, about what makes you feel alive." "And if the answer scares me?" Oliver asked. "Then you're probably on the right track," Henry replied. "Comfort is the enemy of growth, Oliver. Comfort is what killed your mother's dreams. Comfort is what made me a hermit. Don't let comfort trap you." One evening, Henry gave Oliver a final gift, a sealed envelope addressed in Eleanor's name. "I wrote this letter 40 years ago," Henry explained. "Right after she left. I never sent it. But I want you to have it. I want you to read it, and then I want you to do something with it. I want you to take it to your mother. I want you to tell her my story. I want you to tell her that I never stopped thinking about her, that I never stopped wishing her happiness, and that I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to keep her." Oliver took the envelope. It was yellowed with age, the paper fragile. He could feel the weight of 40 years of unsent words. "What if she doesn't want to know?" Oliver asked. "Then at least you tried," Henry said. "At least you gave her the choice that I didn't give her then. At least you offered her the possibility of closure, or understanding, or whatever she needs." Part 5, The Storm and the Light. In the third week of Oliver's stay, a major storm rolled in. The weather service warned of dangerous conditions: high winds, rough seas, heavy rain. Oliver suggested they secure the lighthouse, prepare for the worst. But Henry seemed almost energized by the storm. "Come," he said. "Let's go up to the light. You should see what it means, this light, this purpose." They climbed the spiral stairs of the lighthouse, higher and higher, until they reached the lamp room at top. Through the storm-tossed windows, Oliver could see nothing but chaos: waves as tall as buildings, rain so heavy it seemed solid, wind that seemed to have physical force. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Henry said, his voice raised above the noise of the storm. "Beautiful and terrible, this is what I've maintained, Oliver. For 40 years, through every storm, every calm night, every season. This light. It's not about me. It's not about my loneliness or my regrets. It's about something larger. It's about being useful. It's about serving a purpose." As Henry spoke, Oliver noticed the light rotating overhead, its beam cutting through the darkness and drain, reaching out into the storm with steady, unwavering purpose. "The light doesn't care if I'm happy," Henry continued. "The light doesn't care if I'm lonely. The light simply does what it was designed to do. But the maintenance of the light, that requires a human. That requires someone willing to show up, day after day, storm after storm, and tend to this flame." Oliver understood, in that moment, something fundamental about Henry. He had reframed his solitude not as punishment or tragedy, but as purpose. He had transformed his isolation into service. They stood together in the lamp room, watching the light rotate through the storm, and for the first time, Oliver felt a kind of peace. Not happiness exactly, but understanding. Understanding that life wasn't about achieving maximum comfort or happiness. Life was about finding something that mattered, something worth devoting yourself to, something larger than your own small concerns. The storm raged all night. Oliver and Henry stayed in the lighthouse, watching the light do its work, and Oliver found himself wondering, what was his light? What was the thing worth devoting himself to? What was his purpose? Part 6, The Question of Return. As October turned into November, Henry's condition deteriorated noticeably. Some days he could barely get out of bed. Other days, lucidity would return and he would insist on sitting by the window, watching the ocean. Oliver called a doctor from the mainland, who came by ferry and confirmed what Henry already knew. He had perhaps weeks, maybe only days. "You should go," Henry told Oliver one evening. "You've been here nearly 2 months. You have a Lafito return to." "I'm not leaving," Oliver said firmly. "Not yet." "Why?" Henry asked. "What are you hoping to accomplish by staying?" "I don't know," Oliver admitted. "Partly, I think, because I want to understand what you're trying to teach me. And partly because I'm afraid that if I leave, I'll go back to my old life, and nothing will have changed." Henry smiled weakly. "That's the real test, isn't it? Not whether you can have a moment of clarity or inspiration, but whether you can transform that clarity into actual change when you return to your ordinary life. That's where most people fail. They have a profound experience, and then they go back to their normal routines, and gradually the experience fades and they return to their old patterns." "So how do you prevent that?" Oliver asked. "How do you make sure the change sticks?" "You have to want it badly enough," Henry said. "You have to be willing to disappoint people. You have to be willing to take risks. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable. Most people aren't willing to pay that price. Most people would rather be safe than authentic." Over the following days, Henry and Oliver had long conversations about life, about choice, about authenticity. Henry talked about the philosophers he'd read, Kierkegaard and Sartre and Heidegger and others. He talked about the nature of freedom, about how freedom wasn't the absence of constraints but the willingness to take responsibility for your own choices. "Your mother thought freedom meant escaping her family," Henry explained. "But what she discovered was that you can't escape constraints entirely. You can only choose which constraints to accept and which to resist. She chose to accept the constraints of marriage, of convention, of security. But she paid a price for that choice. You see that, don't you?" Oliver nodded. He was beginning to see his mother differently now. Not as a failure or a disappointment, but as someone who had made a particular choice at a particular time, and had lived with the consequences of that choice. "The question for you," Henry continued, "is whether you will make the same choice. Whether you will choose security over authenticity. Or whether you will have the courage to choose differently." "But what if I choose differently and it doesn't work out?" Oliver asked. "What if I leave my job and my life falls apart?" "It might," Henry conceded. "Life is risky. There are no guarantees. But here's the thing, your life is falling apart anyway. You're just doing it slowly, through the gradual erosion of your soul. At least if you choose authenticity, you'll fall apart in a direction that feels true to yourself." Part 7, The Final Days. One morning in mid-November, Oliver woke to find that Henry had passed away in his sleep. The old man looked peaceful, as if the struggle had finally ended. Oliver sat with the body for a long time, simply present with the reality of death, of the end of a life that had been lived in solitude and service. He called the authorities on the mainland. A doctor came by ferry to confirm the death. Arrangements were made for Henry's body to be taken to the mainland. The funeral would be small, just a few local people who had known Henry, been served by his lighthouse, or simply respected his dedication. But before the funeral, before the body was removed, Oliver did something that felt important. He climbed to the top of the lighthouse one final time. The light was still rotating, still doing its work, still guiding ships safely through the darkness. Oliver stood in the lamp room and he wept, for Henry, for his mother, for himself, for all the lost possibilities and the difficult choices that make up a human life. As he stood there, Oliver made a decision. Not a grand decision, not one that would immediately change everything. But a real decision nonetheless. He would return to Toronto, but he would not return to his old job. He would take time to figure out what he actually wanted to do with his life. He would contact his mother and share Henry's story with her. He would find a way to honor Henry's legacy, perhaps through design, perhaps through something else entirely. He didn't know what came next. But for the first time in his life, Oliver was okay with not knowing. For the first time, the uncertainty felt like possibility rather than fear. Part 8. The Return Home. 3 weeks later, Oliver sat in his mother's living room in London, Ontario. He had the sealed envelope that Henry had written 40 years ago, and he had Henry's journals and photographs. His mother, practical, composed Eleanor, sat across from him, looking increasingly confused and then increasingly emotional as Oliver told her the story. "Henry," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Henry Whitmore. But I've never told anyone about Henry." "How did you?" "He found me," Oliver explained. "He sent me a letter. He was dying, and he wanted me to know. He wanted me to understand what had happened, and why." His mother stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ordinary suburban street. "I was so young," she said. "And it felt so important, what we had. It felt like the most important thing in the world. But my parents were so certain that I was making a mistake. They were so powerful, so sure of themselves. And I was afraid of losing my family, afraid of being poor, afraid of being alone." "He understood," Oliver said gently. "He never blamed you. He loved you enough to let you go." His mother turned back to face him, tears streaming down her face. "Do you know what the worst part is? I never felt like I had a choice. But I did, didn't I? I could have said no to my parents. I could have fought for him. But I was too scared." Oliver extended the envelope. "He wrote you a letter. He never sent it. But he wanted you to know what he felt, what he thought. Maybe you should read it." His mother took the envelope with trembling hands. She looked at it for a long time without opening it. Finally, she said, "I'm afraid." "I know," Oliver said. "But maybe it's time to read it anyway." His mother opened the letter and began to read. Oliver watched her face change, saw the sorrow, their cognition, the complicated wash of emotions that came from encountering words from a past love, words that had traveled through 40 years to finally reach her. When she finished, she simply sat, holding the letter, and cried. Not dramatically, but with a kind of quiet acceptance, as if she was finally allowing herself to feel all the grief and regret she'd been holding back for decades. "I wasted so much time," she said finally. "Maybe," Oliver replied. "Or maybe you did the best you could with the choices available to you at the time. Maybe you found other things to love and value. Maybe it's possible to regret a choice and still accept that it was the choice you made." His mother looked at him with new eyes. "When did you become so wise?" "I spent 2 months with a lighthouse keeper who had 40 years of solitude to think about life," Oliver said with a slight smile. "Some of it rubbed off on me." Part 9. The New Beginning. 6 months after returning from Beacon Island, Oliver's life looked dramatically different. He had left this architecture firm. He had used his savings to travel, first to Ecuador, then to Nepal, then to Iceland, then to Portugal. He had started a blog documenting his travels and his discoveries, never expecting it to gain any real following. But something unexpected happened. His writing resonated with people. People who were also searching, also feeling trapped by conventional expectations, also wondering if there was another way to live. His blog grew. People started asking if he did speaking engagements, consultations, coaching. He began to build a new career, not as an architect designing buildings, but as a guide helping other people design their lives. One of his first major projects was creating a documentary about Henry's lighthouse. He partnered with a filmmaker and produced a short film about the life of a lighthouse keeper, about solitude and service, about love and loss. The film won an award at an independent film festival. It was picked up by streaming services. Suddenly, Oliver's work was reaching thousands of people. But the most important change was internal. Oliver woke up in the morning now without the sense of dread that had characterized his Toronto years. He felt like he was living a life that belonged to him, that aligned with his values and his truth. It wasn't always comfortable. It wasn't always financially secure. But it was real. His mother, too, had undergone her own transformation. After reading Henry's letter, she had taken a writing course. She had started a blog about the experience of coming to terms with a pivotal choice made decades ago. She had reconnected with some old friends from before her marriage. She and Oliver's father had had several difficult conversations about the life they'd built together and what it meant for both of them. They didn't divorce, but their relationship changed. They became more honest with each other. They gave each other permission to evolve, to grow, to become more authentically themselves. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And Eleanor had written to Henry's former colleagues, expressing her wish to preserve his memory. A memorial was established at the Lighthouse. His journals were digitized and made available to researchers. He was no longer a forgotten hermit, but a man whose solitude had produced wisdom that mattered, that resonated, that changed people's lives. Part 10: The Lighthouse's Light. A year after Henry's death, Oliver returned to Beacon Island. The lighthouse was still standing, still rotating its light through the night. A new keeper had been hired, a younger man named Marcus Howe was taking a break from his corporate career to spend time in solitude and reflection. When Oliver arrived at the dock, Marcus was waiting to greet him. The two men recognized something in each other immediately: the same search, the same hunger, the same willingness to take a path less traveled. Henry left instructions, Marcus explained as they walked toward the lighthouse. He wanted his cottage preserved as a kind of retreat space for people who were going through transitions. Writers, artists, people searching for direction. I'm supposed to facilitate that. To keep the lighthouse running, but also to open it up to people like us. Oliver felt something click into place. I want to help with that, he said. I want to use what Henry taught me to help others navigate their own transformations. I was hoping you'd say that, Marcus said. That evening, Oliver climbed to the top of the lighthouse as darkness fell. He watched the light rotate, watched its beam cut through the gathering darkness, reaching out across the ocean with steady, reliable purpose. And he thought about Henry, about his mother, about all the ways a single choice, to leave, to stay, to fight, to accept, could ripple forward through a life, shaping everything that came after. The light had guided ships safely home. But it had also guided Oliver home, home to himself, home to his authentic path, home to the understanding that the most important journey is the one toward truth. Epilogue: The Keeper's Legacy. 5 years after Henry's death, Beacon Island had become known as a place of refuge and transformation. The lighthouse and keeper's cottage had been restored with funds from Oliver's successful documentary and writing projects. The space was now officially registered as a retreat center, welcoming people from around the world who were seeking to understand their lives, to make important transitions, to discover or rediscover their authentic selves. Oliver spent part of each year on the island, leading workshops and consultations. His mother came for a week every summer, and she had even begun writing a memoir about her time on the island with Henry, about the road not taken, about learning to live with regret while still finding meaning in the path you chose. The lighthouse light still rotated every night. It still served its original purpose, guiding ships safely through the darkness. But now it served another purpose too. It was a beacon for the lost, a symbol of the possibility of transformation, a reminder that solitude can be a gift rather than a curse, and that the lives we're meant to live are often very different from the lives we've been taught to want. On quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the island and the ocean crashed against the rocks, Oliver would stand in the lamp room and think about Henry, about his steadfast devotion to duty, about his capacity to find meaning in solitude, about his final gift to Oliver, the knowledge that it's never too late to choose authenticity, to honor what's true, to let your light shine in the darkness for the benefit of others. The lighthouse still stood. The light still rotated. And in the gathering darkness, it still guided wanderers home. Listen peacefully. Dream deeply. And when you wake, remember, your light is waiting to shine.